The decision which Britain has to make is whether or not to join the euro, not whether or not to leave the European Union.
It is a decision which we will have to make, whether we should join the single currency in due course. However, there are forces around, many people, and we've heard them articulated in recent weeks, who actually feel there is also another decision, whether indeed we should continue with Europe.
If one looks at the TUC, for example, they now have said, John Monks has said more than once, we believe the euro will be good for Britain. The CBI isn't saying that as clearly as that.
The CBI has said very strongly that it believes in the principle of the single currency, that it also believes that perhaps some more time is ready to prepare, and it has been consistent in this, as have been a majority of the CBI members.
But you see, there's the problem, isn't it? The pro-euro people tend to fudge, whereas the anti-euro people are very clear. Their message is far more resonant than the pro-euro message.
No, I don't think it is, and I think we need to distinguish between anti-euro and anti-Europe. What I have heard are many voices in recent days which are seeking to make a case that we have a degree of discretion with regard to how we treat with Europe, which we can do without facing up to the consequences. If we should at some future stage choose to bring Europe to a halt because Europe didn't give us what we wanted, even if it wasn't in the interest of the other members, then Europe would inevitably move on without us and say goodbye, and probably not very fondly.
The chairman of Unilever, Niall Fitzgerald. Well, if this is to be a battle for public opinion, it could well turn into a war of attrition. There are, of course, the enthusiasts on both sides of the argument, but there are also huge numbers of people who are either bemused or bored or both, as we discovered on the streets of London this evening.
I think it's an issue that needs to be addressed because we've got so many differing opinions on it. Like, the Conservatives want to be in Europe but not governed by Europe, or whatever their catchphrase is, and I think they get carried away with like the total politics of it all without thinking about, you know, what impact it's going to have on real people.
I think it's extremely unpopular at the moment. It requires quite a long educational campaign to get the British people to accept the euro.
I'm all in favour of it. We are part of Europe, whether we like it or not. I firmly believe in the United States of Europe.
He's got a policy of wanting to go to Europe, and I think we shouldn't. Most of the people in the country think we shouldn't.
Everyone has this sort of almost like fairy tale romance with the pound and how it's so important that we retain our own currency. And it really would be much easier to have one currency, I think.
The referendum will simply be going through the motions because the question will be so framed that people will answer the way that Blair wants them to answer.
Those are the views out on the streets of London a little earlier on. With me now here in the studio is the Defence Secretary and former Minister for Europe, Geoff Hoon. Secretary of State, you do have a problem, don't you? The antis have a far better slogan.
I don't believe that's true, and if we're referring to the Conservatives, I think they're thoroughly unprincipled position.
We will save the pound. What could be clearer than that?
Well, except that they say we will save the pound until the end of the next Parliament, when they say that they will then presumably look at the situation again. They're not.
And you're saying we will retain the option?
Well, we're saying we will prepare the country for the euro and leave the country to decide. The people of Britain will decide in a referendum. That's a position we've set out clearly now since October 1997. Very, very clear position.
But the position as enunciated at that launch of the campaign this morning was not that those great illustrious figures on the platform were going to go forth and say to the people of Britain, we believe you should vote yes when it comes to the referendum.
And there's a very good reason for that, you know, and we have to learn the lessons from experience. And the experience of the European election campaign, when we had a disastrously low turnout, was that far too many people in this country had simply overlooked the benefits that Europe brings to this country, to their livelihoods, to the way in which they are increasingly integrated into the European Union. Well, it's the fault, I accept, of the leaders of this country who failed to articulate since 1975 the real benefits of British membership. And since 1975, when, remember, overwhelmingly people voted to remain inside what was then called the common market, opinion polls have demonstrated that falling off of support.
But you're making exactly the same mistake again, aren't you? Nobody from senior level of government is going out now and saying this is why the euro is good for the country.
But before that could possibly happen, we have to ensure that people do understand the benefits of membership of the European Union. And frankly, there's been so much adverse publicity in recent times, absurd stories, irritating nonsense about the European Union, that very often people have overlooked the benefits to Britain, and having such a powerful coalition right across the political spectrum, involving people from business, the trade unions, the voluntary sector, demonstrates, and the campaign demonstrates, the importance of British membership.
So when are you going to move from stage 1 to stage 2 and start saying to the people of Britain, these are the arguments on the euro itself?
Well, we've set out the way in which that will occur. Once the economic circumstances are right and are in the interests of Britain, once the 5 tests are satisfied, then the government would put to Parliament the principle that we should become members, and moreover would then put to Parliament legislation that would allow for a referendum, ultimately leaving that decision, quite rightly, in the hands of the British people.
Geoff Hoon, thanks very much indeed. Joining me now is Charles Grant from the Centre for European Reform. Charles, this is a debate being conducted all at one remove. Nobody seems to be approaching the nub of the issue. Why not?
Well, it's hard for the government to approach, as you put it, the issue in that way, because it's trying to hold together a coalition of several different political leaders, and the euro is very unpopular at the moment. So it's quite right, I think, as Geoff Hoon says, that the government should first of all make the case for the EU, why EU membership benefits Britain. Then later on, if the economic criteria have been met, it can start making the case for the euro itself.